to see if the sound works. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Don, or Dan, depending on if you speak Swedish or English. And I am a designer, and I work mainly in the startup space. So I run a small, tiny design consultancy, and we work with many of the nicest startups around. I think here in the region we work with Debricked, Cosmed, Elon Road. We've worked with Minut, and we worked with Orbital Systems. We worked with, I mean, a lot of the startups here. Sooner or later, we meet them because we hang out a lot at we work from the ground, and we hang out a lot at Mink and so on. But we do design and communication work, and I'll tell you a little bit about the type of help that we push startups in different directions depending on what phase they're in. But I don't know. I've been in this. I'm born in Malmö, and I've lived and worked in this. I've worked in this region, in this field, for more than 20 years now. So I feel like such a veteran. But there's always like new talents, new startups coming around. It's always fun to see who will be at all these events. And yeah, meeting new people is something I really enjoy. And I mean, I think the startup ecosystem just gets better every year. So thanks to everybody supporting it. So today, I think I have like 15 minutes or something. Yeah. And if I'll start my presentation, the title that you gave me was like how to design your company, and it's a big topic. So I think maybe I'll just talk a little bit about some techniques that we use when we work with really early stage startups. So these are techniques that anybody can use. You don't have to be a designer. You sort of if you are a founder, or if you are actually starting out anything new in any area, these are techniques that we suggest that you should use. So I'll give some examples really quickly of sort of this extremely early stage design work. So now we're sort of earlier than you getting your company name, creating your web page, doing nice sales pitches and material and all that stuff. Like before you even know exactly what it is that you're offering people, there are some things that we think you should be doing. You might have heard about some of these techniques before. So yeah, this is me and my colleague Christopher and some of the projects we're involved in. You can check out our webpage some other time. But like as designers, we sort of have two challenges, and I think this is any founder realizes this, right? You sort of, once you know what you're building, you need to get the design right. You need to do craft the product in the right way. But that's just sort of the visible part of a huge iceberg. How do you know if you're designing the right thing in the first place? Are you addressing a relevant problem? Is there anybody who wants to pay for this, whatever it is that you're doing? That's like the invisible design work. That's not so fancy as sort of pushing pixels and choosing colors and fonts and all that stuff. But this is the responsibility of any founder, of anybody trying to ever do anything new. They need to make sure that we are designing the right thing. We're doing something that people need here. So how do you know if you're doing that? I'll give you 3 examples really quickly with some faces from the startup community. So starting with Minut, this is a startup that are quite successful today. They're growing quickly. They're a hardware startup, and they've already raised a Series A. Their founder Nils, we helped them in their Kickstarter campaigns back in the days. They create this little sort of home alarm puck that you put in your ceiling if you are a short-term rental host. For example, if you have an Airbnb, you want to know that your guests are behaving okay, they're not breaking any rules, but at the same time you don't want to put cameras up and have surveillance systems in place. So it's sort of a very, very soft approach to sort of just making sure that people aren't smoking indoors, they're not having really noisy parties, there not being too many people in the apartment, so they're violating the rules of the Airbnb. So back when Nils got started, like the first thing he did, like he was prototyping and working on like this product idea. But one of the very first things he did was just making a lot of phone calls. So he called like short-term rental hosts all over the place, everybody he could reach, and he just talk to them about these things, like how are you solving this today? What are your worries? And he wasn't specifically talking about his idea or what he was trying to build. He was just really trying to understand how are people solving the problem today. So that is sort of one of the core main responsibilities of startup founders is not to get too hung up on your very idea, but just really getting to know your target customers and how they're currently solving the problems today. And I've met so many startups, and they've been around for 5, 6, 7 years, and they did a bad job doing the basic research, and that means that they have to constantly change and pivot. Like when they are big big team already, maybe 10 plus people, they already have stuff out in the market, but it's not really the right thing. It's because they were doing a sloppy job understanding how are people solving that problem today and where do we fit in. So this sort of technique of interviewing people properly is kind of simple. Like in the beginning, you just learn about how people are solving the problem today. Then once you want to present your idea, you go out and confirm that there might be an interest for what you do. So that's typically the sort of the Kickstarter campaign part of it. You sort of create a prototype, and then you see if people are willing to pay for it. But the learn part, like I know many people pay lip service to this. They say that they do it, but I think many startups are like should be doing a better job here. And if you just want to have one resource, this is the book. Read this book called The Mom Test. It's like 150 pages or something, super easy read. It will teach you all about sort of how to talk to potential customers without sort of creating this sort of founder's bias of you pitching your idea and people getting like all excited about it and giving you like energy back, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't at all mean that they would be buying your product if you built it. Excellent resource. It's kind of simple technique to understand, but many people are failing at it. So please read it, and read it again if you haven't, if you read it like 10 years ago. Another really nice startup here, completely different in the region, is Repamera. So I don't know if any of you have ever met Henning. He has this service for repairing clothes. So it's like an Airbnb-ish marketplace startup where he sort of matches people with worn clothes that needs to be repaired with tailors. So in our region, we have a lot of excellent tailors, but they might not, people might not know that they're around because they speak other languages and they have these little sort of repair shops. And I don't know if I go in there with my jacket, I don't know how, I feel so I'm speaking for the customer now, but I might I've never been to a tailor before. How do I know if I'm going to go get the right thing at the right price and so on? So Henning realized that there might be people out there with a lot of clothes that should be repaired, but they wouldn't take the leap to go out and find themselves a tailor, even though it's not that hard. So he, when he had this idea, like he had a jacket himself, I think he wanted to repair, and he said like, there must be other people like me. He just started a Facebook chat in the evening, and that same evening when he started a Facebook chat with a lot of people he knew, he took his first orders. So he said, okay, I'll come and pick up your clothes, and I'll make sure they are repaired, and then you pay me. So he started doing, like, providing the service, and he did all the work, like manually. He didn't repair the clothes, but he did all the sort of logistics and matchmaking and finding the right tailor and so on, before he even knew if this was going to be a company at all. Like, he was just trying something out. But he took orders and he did a lot of manual work, and then from there he started building something that scaled. And now he has a really nice web, what do you call it, e-commerce platform with, like, they're expanding to Denmark and so on. So they started out with him biking around Malmö, and he did that manual legwork for a long time. He was biking around Malmö with clothes for a long time before it started to scale, right? So this technique is called the Concierge technique. So it's French. I think the Concierge is somebody who lives in the bottom of the building and makes sure that everybody's happy in the building. So it sort of means that you're doing consultancy work, you're doing service work for a while. You're doing a lot of manual work just to make sure that people are interested in this, they're willing to pay to have their problems solved. And then over time you can say, okay, now I know that people really have this need, they're willing to pay for it. Then you can start sort of building something that scales better. So of course you should have a scalable idea to start with, otherwise you'll be stuck in consultancy work and manual service work. But it's it's an excellent sort of starting point after you've done the interviews with people, realizing how they solve the problem today. Then you go out and try to solve their problems manually with the Concierge method. So the third startup I'd like to mention is a completely whack idea. It's like one of the early NFT projects from, and when I say early, it's like 3 years old, but it's crypto, it's a collectible, it's just a thing for fun, really. So the previous two startups I mentioned are sort of problem solvers. They solve problems for short-term rentals. They solve problems for people who want to have their clothes repaired. This third one is more of sort of a what do you call it? So the previous ones would be called painkillers. So this is more of a vitamin. This is more like, this is not something you need in your life, but it creates some energy and some joy for you. So if you are sort of interested in building experiences like computer games or whatever, like these are techniques that you can use. So what this project is about is like creating collectible cards from web pages. So if you have a web page that you like, and you can create a little collectible card around that web page, and every card every web page can only be minted once, so you can only have one. So every card will be unique, and we have this generative art and everything around it, and we're deeply involved in this project. It's like this has been like our hobby project for a while, but it's becoming more and more serious. So we met the founders, Johan and Matthias, and they are amazing community builders. So they are really like building the startup around a community. And when they're building the community, they have like everything that happens goes on in Discord. So they're interacting with some collectors, and like almost, like I would say 95% of everything that happens just happens in a chat. And then they experiment in that chat, like, you know, they play little games and try out different things. And then if something becomes really popular, then they put it on their webpage. So they experiment with the behavior of collectors and little games in a chat, and then they productify. Then they turn it into a product on their webpage. So really, this is not their Discord chat, but this is like what it looks like. This is the user experience, and apart from you getting the NFTs, like you're all in a chat. But it's a great way to learn what excites people and what they want, and what games are fun to play. And then they design games that are a little bit more like this, like on the web page you can vote for whatever card you like the most and so on. But really, the principle that they followed, and I think this is this is something I first heard about from a startup that got acquired by Google a long time ago called Aardvark. It's like this process of creating value is like extremely iterative, and you start with just a lot of service. You don't have a lot of product. This is like Henning, when he began, he didn't have any web presence, whatever, but he still was solving people's problems. And then over time, you sort of decrease the amount of service you provide, and you start replacing that service with something that scales, which is a product. So with the marble cards, like they do that all the time. They have Discord, then they bring in bots into Discord to automate some parts of the work, and then we implement it on their web. So really, like, it's creating a startup is not like first you have an idea, and then you pitch deck, and then you get your funds, and then you build a product. It's more like, no, you go out and start serving like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 customers, like maybe the first week or month, and you keep those in the loop, and you service those. And then you sort of learn from those interactions, and over time you learn what really people are willing to pay for. And then you start replacing that service with something that scales better. And that can be little chatbots, or it can be a so-so web page, or a really basic app or whatever. It doesn't have to be sort of flashy and nice and all that stuff. Like, people come to us and they want like branding, and they want everything to look so good, and we're like, we're designers for startups, and we say like, okay, do we know we're solving a real problem? And if so, how can we serve your existing 5 to 10 to 15 customers the best way? It's not about building a nice web page and an app. It's like, it's a huge waste of resources if you don't know that this is what people need. It's much better to do a lot of manual work in the beginning and then productify over time. So it's like, I mean, some of the best startups work this way, and we advise people to do that. So it's kind of ironic when they come to us and want design, and we tell them to do, no, you don't do design. You do this instead. But it's part of our job. Finally, this last technique can be somewhat called the Wizard of Oz technique. It's like when people think that they're interacting with a product, but they're really interacting with people. It's sort of next level concierge. So in the beginning, in the concierge technique, you know that you're interacting with a person. When you sort of hide people in the system, it's more like the Wizard of Oz, like the the guy behind the curtains. So these 3 techniques will take you quite far as a startup. Then you can start scaling and building products that actually sort of can reach a much larger customer base. I write some articles sometimes on Medium and elsewhere. So yeah, this one is about these 3 techniques, the invisible design techniques. This one is more specifically about how to prototype in Discord and Slack. But yeah, you can always reach out. Here's my Twitter handle and our webpage. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. So I will open up to the audience in a moment, but I just wanted to start with a few questions for myself. So you talked a lot about the sort of early stages here, and that you're advising the people, maybe not so much on the design, which is the focus of nobiz, but on the innovation process as a whole. And I looked that you have a background in musicology and initially did audio design things, and then you actually had a consultancy for a number of years. Could you tell us a little bit about that consultancy and how that one differs from what nobiz does today, and did you pivot with what nobiz does?
Oh, that's a long time ago. Yeah, sure. I mean, that was what I studied, and that was what made me sort of start working in the tech scene at all. And I think you know, you find something that interests you, and you get a sort of a foot in the door, whatever it is, and then from there you learn new things. So the reason I actually started working in tech was because I was really interested in sound design, and I was interested in helping people with visual impairment use the internet and use digital services. And I worked with that for many, many years, but in different formats. I was an employee and I was a consultant, but over time I sort of just started expanding into new areas and getting more interested in other things. So nowadays I think I work more with like communication and video creation and all that stuff. But again, like I think you're asking about things that happened like 20 years ago. So, but yeah, I mean, so I think being a consultant and also being a designer is like really just always asking a lot of whys and trying to understand what is the real problem here, what's like the most important thing. And not very often the answer to that question is better sound design, but sometimes it is.
But I mean, in terms of what you learned from your first consultancy versus this one, and then the time that you had in between. So you worked with Eon and Sony with their accelerator programs and looking more broadly at innovation, not just the design element. So what are your big takeaways through those sort of experiences that you had?
Okay, that's a good question. So first of all, I think dipping your toes in many places and learning about many things, like trying out what it's like to work on your own or as a consultant or like as an employee or in large organizations, small organizations. I mean, you learn so much. So I worked with TAT, the company that got acquired 10 years ago now, here in Malmö, and there I got to work with a lot of designers and I learned a lot from that. But then that company got acquired by BlackBerry, which was like a large company, and it was really interesting because then I learned other things working with BlackBerry, and I saw, these are the problems you face when you're like a large company trying to do innovation. And what I learned there helped me then better consult with Eon and Sony and the larger companies, because it's harder. Like it's harder to pitch an idea inside a large organization. Then it's completely different than pitching it as a startup. As a startup, you have to find one person who supports you, one person who says yes. Then you have the funding, then you can run with it. But like in a large organization, it's enough that one important person says no, and they'll kill the whole project. So it's like the rules are completely opposite, and you have to understand that. So if I advise a startup, I advise them in one way, and if I advise a large company, I advise them completely differently. But it's sort of the same challenge. You're trying to bring something new into the world that hasn't existed before. And so if you want to do that, I think there are some building blocks you need to get right. And these are the sort of the best techniques that I've learned over all these years by reading and trying to apply what I read and watching YouTube videos and so on. But I enjoy teaching too, so that's why I sort of like to go out and tell other people about it.
And so we actually had an online poll before this session with a number of questions, and one of them was about how you recruit people for your team and also how you find co-founders. So I was wondering, how did you and Chris meet, and how did you know that this was the right person to actually start a business with?
It's such a great story. No, but I was working with BlackBerry and also before TAT, and one of the techniques we had for recruiting was just bringing in a lot of students. And I know that Malmö Startups is really good at that as well. It's kind of startups, but like bringing in a lot of young people. If you only bring in one intern at a time, you need to be supervise them a lot because they need a lot of help and they need to sort of learn by hanging out with you. And we never really had time for that, so we brought in many students at the same time. So they became their own little community inside the company. So they helped each other a lot. And then we supervised them, once a week or every second week or so on. So I saw a lot of students, like dozens and dozens and dozens of students over the years, both at TAT and BlackBerry. And I used to be out like this, talking to students and getting them, inspired to come and apply for internships with us. And that's how I met Chris. And he was just the best student I met during all those years. So yeah.
Cool.
It's a good story.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage people to take on the internships? So because with a lot of startups, you might want to attract as much expertise as possible, but obviously that comes with potentially a sacrifice for people financially. So how do you attract other experience and other expertise from people that maybe are unsure about going on the risky route with a startup?
Yeah. So the more senior people are, the more they have to lose, the more they're risking, really. So if you're recruiting young people straight out of university, then they have everything to gain. And I think I have some critique, but I think the university system that we have today, the academic part of it, like at Lund University, they have too little sort of practice and exposure to real workplaces. I know they have it at LTH and other places, but it comes quite late. Like I think you should, as a student, you should expose yourself to real workplaces as early as possible. And that's from me learning from experience. Like I spent, 4.5 years in university before I even started working somewhere. And I actually did a little bit of work at Ericsson back in the days. But when you come out after 4 years at university or 3 or more, you don't know what you're going to do. But if you're going out after just 1 or 2 years and going to try out, what is it like to work in a startup? What is it like to work at a big company? You get a much better sense of what it is that you want. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for students while they're studying. Take a few months off or build it into the education. Bring them out to different workplaces. And then if you are a startup person or if you're not a startup person. You can only know by trying. So I encourage everybody to sort of try to get as many students as possible into your organization. And definitely the university system should encourage students to go and get some experience. But it's hard to be the only student, I think. And we get many applications and they want to come and do their internship with us. But it's impossible. We can't supervise a student. We're consultants, we're super busy. But if we had 5 students coming in, say, hey, we want to hang out together as a group in your company and learn by watching you guys. That might be more easy to handle, actually.
Pretty cool idea. I like the idea of integrating it into the education system, having a little bit of that on-off sort of setup. And one final question before I open up to the audience, to do with sort of funding and when you sort of make the leap of faith. So a lot of these examples, people are going out and asking questions and testing things, and that can be quite time consuming. And at the same time, you still need to pay the bills, and then you also need to maybe actually apply for funding at some point so that you can do that.
Yeah.
And depending on if you have something which maybe needs to have IP or doesn't, depending on what type of company it is, when do you take that leap of faith of just committing 100% when you maybe don't have any investment yet, and how long can you go without investment, and what sort of routes can you suggest in those very early stages?
Wow, it's a big question. I don't have a good answer. I admire founders who actually take this leap because it's not easy. But it's sort of the only thing I think gets easier over time. So if you're a serial founder, you've learned from your previous experience, and if you've worked in a startup, you know a little bit more what it's like to run a startup, right? So to go straight from sort of university or straight from working at Tetra Pak and then starting your own business, I think it can be quite hard. But if you sort of hang out with startups and get to know other startups and see, under what conditions do they work, it gets a little bit, at least you have some pattern recognition. You have some way of sort of saying, okay, I see this is working, this is not working. But the answer to that is super different depending on if you're building like a very software heavy or hardware heavy startup, or like how much services there are, and deep tech or not. Like this, I mean, sometimes some of these companies are really, really hard to build anything without a lot of venture capital. But if you're like, trying to build a little web page service app thing, you can go quite far with just having it as your side hustle. So yeah, it's a very hard thing to answer.
Well, you made a good crack at it at least.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Yeah. But now I will open up to the audience, if that's okay. If you're okay
sure.
with a few
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
questions. So if anyone has any questions from the audience, I'll pass the mic around.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dan.
Hey.
And, I have a question because I think you're talking about the private services and the products for the peoples, and the value of the services is lowering with the time developing, right? So you're also talking about how the product is growing by the times, if they can make a better product and lure the attentions from the customers. So I was thinking about the series was called The Long Tails, and it was written by the Christian Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
It's American
Mm-hmm.
authors, and he talked about no matter how or what kind of the products, as long as you invent it, there always have the people to buy in it. So what is your opinion about the Long Tail series?
Oh, yeah, the long tail, I remember that. But yeah, it's tricky, right? Because you're looking for your first customers, but you would want to know that over time there's going to be more customers. So if you're really unlucky, you'll find some super passionate users that you think represents real traction, but then they are a very, very small niche, and that group of people will never grow. So I think, for example, now looking into all these crypto projects, it's like, there's a few people who are extremely passionate, spending a lot of money and all that stuff, but like, is this really ever going to grow and become mainstream, or is it like a long tail phenomenon? It's impossible to know. And so I think one of the key leaps of faith is like, you want to be early with something and then catch a wave as it grows. But many people were just bad. The timing was just bad. Like, internet companies in the early 90s. The ideas were good, the timing was bad. So I think you really want to find people who are very passionate about what it is that you're building, but then you would like to somehow have some type of feeling that this is going to grow. This is not just a small niche group of people. But how to do that, I don't know. Sorry about that.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said you read, watch YouTube videos, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What would be some top of mind books and YouTube videos for early stage startup founders?
Yes. I don't know if you were in the early part of my presentation, but this book is a must read, and I think many people have read it by now. The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick, and he's got he's got other good books, but they're not as startup focused. He's got a good YouTube channel. So there's these sort of the basic building blocks. It's like one of the basic building blocks is like how to get the most learnings out of a customer interaction as possible without you just ruining it by being the enthusiastic entrepreneur who's just going to pitch like crazy. Like, that's not your role when you're meeting real customers. Maybe that's your role when you're meeting investors, but not with customers. So this one teaches you some of the basic techniques. Then I think on the same note, like reading really early Paul Graham stuff when he was like just starting Y Combinator, he wrote an article called "Do Things That Don't Scale," and that article is really what this one is about. It's like, do manual work in the beginning, do manual work for longer than you think before you start building something that scales. Because as you're doing the manual work, you're very close to the customers. You're talking to them every day. You're serving them like as a concierge or as a consultant, but you're not missing anything. As soon as you start building a product and you like start looking at the trends on your Google dashboard, and you're not getting the real raw data anymore. You're getting data points, but you don't know why people are behaving the way they're doing. So if you're like putting out an app and you only have 100 users, like don't study the data points. You know, go out and talk to 10 of those users at least every week, so you're still learning. So really doing things that don't scale is sort of the next. It's related, but it's another really good resource. And they have many more. But just starting to understand those sort of basic behaviors, I think it's, if you get that right, you're in a good place.
Thank you.
Thanks for a great introduction to design. Do you have any tips on how to build a culture that goes hand in hand with a team culture that goes hand in hand with what you're asking, what you're advising us to do when it comes to building startups?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, when you are building your team, like, I think almost everything should be everybody's responsibility. So talking to customers is not like one person's job. It's like everybody on the team. While you're 5, even 10 people, everybody should be talking to customers, taking customer support calls, or, you know, put your own phone numbers and email addresses on your webpage. You're not going to get too many calls. If you're getting too many calls, it might be a good sign. It might mean that, you know, a lot of people are interested and they really want you to serve them, right? So until it starts to break, let everybody be really close to the customer. And I think this is something you can teach young people that come straight out of university, because they don't know what it's like to work, right? So they can sort of say, in this company, everybody talks to the customer every day. Okay, that's fine. They'll do it, right? But if you're employing like a data analyst expert that has 10 years of experience from Alfa Laval or whatever, like that person is a specialist. It's kind of hard to get that person to also take customer support calls every week. so it's like you have to shape this culture quite early. And when you're building a company with young people, it's easier, I think. They're more flexible. But if you're hiring like specialists, you have to be much more clear about these things. I know you're an expert on AI, but you also have to talk to the customer. Like it's not that easy. Yeah.
So the founder's dilemma, I can't remember the name of the author, I'm sorry. But Wasserman, yeah. So that's a good book on the subject of how to deal with team dynamics and how to build a team. If you haven't read it yet.
Founder's dilemma.
Okay, so I mean, everyone else that hasn't asked a question, you're more than happy to ask a question off the live stream.
Yeah.
So I think now we will thank Dan for his for his presentation today and for answering the questions. Thank you very much for attempting even the ones you thought were tricky. And I think we're just going to carry on with the standard format now of Coffee Morning, where we just grab a coffee, mingle, and have a chat. And hopefully you can get to meet everyone else, and everyone else can get to meet you on a more personal level.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
You.